The stars had never seemed so cold as they did on the night the Valarian Dominion came to Earth. High Admiral Keth Voran stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Wrath, watching the small blue planet grow larger in the view screen before him. He had conquered 17 worlds in his long career, and this one would be number 18. Such a tiny world, he said to his second-in-command, a scarred veteran named Thexoran. And yet they have caused so much noise in the galactic community. Thexoran nodded his large head, his 4 eyes blinking in sequence as he studied the tactical display. The humans had assembled their entire fleet in orbit around their homeworld, a collection of primitive vessels that looked like toys compared to the 400 warships of the Dominion Armada. They are brave, Thexoran admitted. But bravery without power is just another word for stupidity. The Valarian Dominion had ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years. They had crushed empires that spanned hundreds of star systems. They had broken species that had mastered technologies humanity could not even dream of. And they had never once failed to conquer a world they set their sights upon. Humanity was just another name on a very long list. The battle began at dawn, Earth time. The human fleet charged forward with desperate courage, their weapons blazing against the shields of the Dominion warships. Admiral Keth Voran almost felt sorry for them as he watched their missiles explode harmlessly against energy barriers that had stopped weapons 1,000 times more powerful. "Return fire," he commanded, and the Dominion fleet unleashed hell. The human ships died quickly. Some exploded in brilliant flashes of light, others broke apart into spinning debris, and a few tried to retreat only to be cut down by precise energy beams. Within 3 hours, the entire human space force had been reduced to floating wreckage. Voran felt no satisfaction in the victory because there had never been any doubt about the outcome. This was not war. This was pest control. The ground invasion followed immediately. Dominion dropships descended through Earth's atmosphere like metal rain, carrying millions of soldiers to every major city on the planet. The humans fought back with everything they had, tanks and aircraft and soldiers with primitive projectile weapons. But nothing they did could stop the advance. New York fell in 6 hours. Beijing fell in 4. Moscow held out for almost 2 days before the last defenders were overwhelmed. City after city, nation after nation, the blue planet turned red with the blood of its defenders. Emperor Malthex watched the conquest from his throne room on the Dominion homeworld, surrounded by advisors and generals who praised his wisdom in ordering the invasion. He was an ancient creature, his scaled skin marked with the ceremonial scars of 100 victories, and he had ruled the Dominion for 300 years. "The humans are broken," reported General Sevrak through the holographic communication system. "Their militaries have surrendered, their governments have collapsed, and their people are ready to accept our rule." The Emperor smiled, revealing rows of sharp teeth that had once torn the throat from a rival in ritual combat. He had heard such reports many times before, from many different worlds, and they always pleased him. "Excellent," he said, his deep voice echoing through the chamber. "Begin the occupation immediately. I want human labor working in our mines within a month." On Earth, the survivors emerged from their shelters to find a world transformed. Valarian soldiers patrolled every street. Dominion flags flew from every government building, and massive holographic displays announced the terms of humanity's surrender in every language. The Treaty of Submission was signed in the ruins of the United Nations headquarters in New York. Human leaders from every surviving nation lined up to press their thumbs to the document, their faces empty of hope, their spirits crushed by the speed and totality of their defeat. Ambassador Elena Vasquez was the last to sign. She was a tall woman with dark hair streaked with gray, her face lined with the stress of the invasion, but her eyes remained sharp and clear as she approached the signing table. She had been one of Earth's most skilled diplomats before the war, known for her ability to read people and situations with uncanny A curious Valarian senator, Ythrol, watched her approach with curiosity. He had studied humans extensively before the invasion, fascinated by their complex societies and violent history. And something about this woman made him uneasy. "You do not seem as broken as the others," he observed as she took the signing device in her hand. Vasquez looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable, and then she leaned close to whisper in his ear. The senator's face changed color, shifting from its normal deep blue to a pale violet that indicated extreme distress. "What did she say to you?" demanded Admiral Kethvoran, who had noticed the exchange from across the room. Ythrol did not answer immediately. He simply stared at the human woman as she calmly signed the treaty and walked away, her back straight and her head held high despite the armed guards surrounding her. "Senator," Kethvoran pressed, "I asked you a question." "She reminded me of something," Ythrol said quietly. "A human concept called Rule Number 1. "And what is that?" The senator shook his head, his four eyes still fixed on the doorway through which the ambassador had disappeared. He had spent years studying human military history, human philosophy, human psychology, and now all of that knowledge churned in his mind like poison. "I need to speak with the High Council," he said. Immediately, but the High Council did not want to hear warnings. They were too busy celebrating the successful conquest of another world, too pleased with themselves to listen to the concerns of a nervous senator who had spent too much time reading human books. "The humans are defeated," Emperor Malthex declared when Ythrol finally secured an audience. "Their fleet is destroyed. Their armies are crushed. Their leaders have submitted. What more proof do you need?" "Your Majesty," Ythrol tried to explain, "humans are not like other species we have conquered. Their history shows a pattern of behavior that should concern us. They have a saying that no plan survives first contact with the enemy. And they believe that true wars are won not in the first battle but in the last." The Emperor laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the walls of the throne room. His advisors joined in, mocking the foolish senator who feared a species that had been so easily defeated. "Go back to your books," Malthex commanded, "and leave the business of war to those who understand it. The humans are broken, and they will serve the Dominion for the next 10,000 years like every other conquered species." Ythrol bowed and retreated, knowing that further argument was useless. He returned to his quarters and tried to sleep. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw Ambassador Vasquez leaning close to whisper those words that now haunted his dreams. "Rule Number 1, she had said, her breath warm against his ear. "Humans never stop fighting. We just stop fighting where you can see us, and somewhere in the occupied cities of Earth. In the work camps and the administrative buildings and the underground shelters that the Dominion had not yet discovered. Humanity began to plan. They smiled at their conquerors. They followed orders. They learned the Valarian language and studied Dominion technology and asked questions that seemed innocent but were anything but the Valarian Dominion. Thought they had won. They had no idea that the real war had not even begun. 3 months passed since the conquest of Earth, and the silence was beginning to disturb Intelligence Officer Selethrish had spent her entire career studying conquered species, learning their patterns of behavior, predicting their acts of rebellion before they could happen. She was very good at her job, and her instincts had saved Dominion lives on a dozen different worlds, but humans confused her. Every other species the Dominion had conquered followed the same pattern. First came the shock of defeat, then the grief, then the anger, and finally the rebellion. Some species took weeks to reach that final stage, others took years. But all of them eventually fought back in some way. Humans did nothing. Zelethera stood in her office on the orbital station above Earth, staring at report after report that all said the same thing. Production quotas were being met, work assignments were being followed, and there had not been a single act of sabotage or violence against Dominion personnel in 90 days. This is wrong, she muttered to herself. Pulling up the latest statistics on her holographic display, Governor Dex Oren, who had been promoted after the invasion, entered her office with a satisfied expression on his scarred face. He had been enjoying his new position very much, and he did not appreciate the intelligence officer's constant worrying. Still looking for problems that do not exist? He asked, settling his large body into a chair that creaked under his weight. The humans are too quiet, Selther replied, not looking away from her display. They should be angry. They should be fighting back. But instead, they just smile and follow orders. Dex Oren laughed and waved one of his 4 arms dismissively. He had seen the humans up close during the invasion, had watched them break and surrender, and he had no doubt that they were truly defeated. Perhaps they are simply smarter than other conquered species, he suggested. Perhaps they have accepted their new place in the galaxy. No species accepts defeat this easily, Selethra insisted, especially not one with their history. Do you know how many wars humans have fought against each other? Thousands. They have been killing each other since before they learned to write, and you think they have suddenly become peaceful? The governor shrugged his massive shoulders and stood to leave. He had better things to do than listen to paranoid theories from an intelligence officer who had never actually fought in a battle. Send me a report when you find actual evidence of a problem, he said. Until then, enjoy the peace. But there was no peace for Selethra. She spent her nights reviewing security footage from human cities, watching the conquered people go about their daily lives, searching for any sign of the resistance she knew must be forming. What she found instead was even more disturbing. The humans were learning. They asked questions about everything, about Dominion technology and Dominion culture and Dominion government. They volunteered for positions in administrative offices where they could access computer systems. They requested assignments to maintenance crews where they could study the machinery that kept the occupation running, and they were teaching each other. Selethra discovered networks of humans, sharing information in ways that Dominion's translation software could not understand. They used old languages, dead languages, codes hidden in seemingly innocent conversations. They passed notes in handwriting that looked like random scribbles, but clearly carried meaning to those who received them. She tried to report her findings to the High Council, but her warnings were dismissed just as Senator Yuvus had been. The Dominion was too confident in its victory, too certain of its superiority, to believe that a primitive species could pose any real threat. You are seeing shadows, Admiral Kethvoran told her during a communication from his flagship. The humans are broken. I saw it myself when they signed the treaty. There is nothing left in them but fear and submission. Ambassador Elena Vasquez sat in her cell on the same orbital station, watching the stars through a small window that the Dominion had not bothered to cover. She was supposed to be a prisoner, a symbol of humanity's defeat, kept alive to remind others of what happened to those who resisted the Dominion, but she was far more than a prisoner every day. Valarian guards came to check on her, and every day she smiled at them and asked polite questions about their families, their homes, their duties. They thought she was trying to be friendly, trying to earn better treatment through good behavior. They did not realize she was gathering intelligence. One guard told her about the supply schedule. Another mentioned the rotation of security personnel. A third complained about problems with the station's communication system. None of them thought these small details mattered, but Vasquez collected them all like precious gems at night. When the guards were not watching, she used a communication device hidden in her tooth to send encrypted messages to contacts on the surface. The device was human technology, simple and primitive by Dominion standards, which was exactly why the Dominion scanners had not detected it. Phase 1 is complete. She transmitted on the 91st day of occupation. Begin Phase 2 on Earth. The message spread through the network of resistance cells that had been quietly forming since the first day of surrender. In every city, in every work camp, in every administrative building, humans received the signal and began to move. They did not attack. That would come later instead. They started asking different questions, making different observations, taking different notes. They shifted their attention from learning how the Dominion worked to learning how to make it stop working. Human engineer in a power plant memorized the exact sequence of commands that would cause a cascade failure in the reactor. A human worker in a food processing facility identified the chemical compounds that would contaminate supplies without being detected by Dominion scanners. A human administrator discovered the back door, codes that would allow access to classified communication channels, and still they smiled and followed orders and gave no sign that anything had changed. Senator Yithrol could not sleep. He had tried meditation. He had tried medication. He had tried exhausting himself with physical exercise. But nothing could quiet the voice in his head that kept repeating the human ambassador's words. Humans never stop fighting. We just stop fighting where you can see us. He began to conduct his own investigation, accessing records and reports that most senators would never bother to read. He found small details that others had missed, patterns that only someone looking for them would notice. Maintenance requests had increased by 12% in the last month, but no actual maintenance problems had been reported. That meant humans were creating opportunities to access equipment they were not supposed to touch. Communication traffic between human workers had decreased on monitored channels but increased on unmonitored ones. Somehow they had figured out which frequencies were being watched and which were not. And there were the questions. So many questions being asked by so many humans about so many different aspects of Dominion operations. Yithrol created a map showing all the questions that had been asked and all the humans who had asked them. And when he finished, he stared at the result in horror. The questions formed a complete picture of every critical system in the occupation. Infrastructure. The humans were not just learning. They were mapping their enemies' weaknesses with a patience and precision that Yithrol had never seen in any conquered species. He tried once more to warn the High Council, but once more he was dismissed. The Emperor was busy planning the expansion of mining operations on Earth. The admirals were preparing for a new campaign against a distant star system. And no one wanted to hear about a nervous senator's theories. If you were so concerned, Emperor Malthex finally said with obvious irritation, then go to Earth yourself and conduct an inspection. Perhaps seeing the conquered humans in person will calm your fears. It was meant as a dismissal, a way to get rid of an annoying advisor. But Yithrol took the suggestion seriously. He booked passage on the next transport to the Sol system, determined to find evidence that would force the High Council to listen. He did not know that his arrival had been anticipated, that human observers had tracked his movements since he left the throne world, that Ambassador Vasquez was already planning how to use him. The game was larger than any single piece, and humanity was playing a very long game indeed. The first explosion happened on a Tuesday. Dominion transport ship carrying supplies from the orbital station to the surface suddenly veered off course and crashed into a mountain range in what had once been called Switzerland. 200 Valarian crew members died instantly, and the investigation concluded that a navigation software error had caused the disaster. Governor Dexoran read the report and accepted its conclusions without question. Software errors happened, even in Dominion technology, and there was no evidence of human involvement. 3 days later, an industrial station in the former United States suffered a catastrophic reactor failure. The explosion killed over 1,000 Valarian workers and destroyed equipment worth more than the entire annual output of some conquered worlds. The investigation found evidence of improper maintenance, but the humans who had performed that Maintenance had all the proper certifications and had followed all the proper procedures. There was no way to prove they had done anything wrong. 1 week after that, Fleet Commander Drexnell was found dead in his quarters, poisoned by a compound that did not exist in any Dominion database. The medical examiners could not even identify what had killed him, let alone where it had come from. Governor Thexoran was no longer laughing. How is this happening? He demanded during an emergency meeting with his senior staff, his 4 eyes wild with a combination of rage and fear. We have security systems that should detect any threat. We have surveillance covering every human population center. We have informants in every work unit. Intelligence Officer Selithra stood at the back of the room, watching the governor's breakdown with grim satisfaction. She had warned them. She had told them something was wrong. And now her predictions were coming true. The humans are fighting back, she said calmly. They've been planning this since the day of the surrender. But how? Thexoran demanded. They have no weapons, no organization, no way to communicate without us knowing. They have all of those things, Selithra replied. We just could not see them. They built their networks in the shadows, while we were busy congratulating ourselves on our victory. Senator Uthral arrived on Earth 3 days after the poisoning. He had followed the news of the disasters from his transport ship, watching the reports with growing dread, knowing that everything he had feared was coming true. His first stop was the detention center where Ambassador Vasquez was being held. He needed to understand what was happening, and she was the only human who had ever shown him a glimpse of the truth. The guards let him into her cell without question. He was a senator of the Dominion, and his authority was not to be challenged. Vasquez was sitting by her window when he entered, watching the stars with an expression of perfect calm. Senator Yithril, she said without turning around. I wondered when you would come. You knew this would happen, he accused. You told me on the day of the surrender that humans never stop fighting. I did. Why? Why warn me if you knew I could not stop it? Vasquez finally turned to look at him, and Yithril saw something in her eyes that he had never seen in any conquered being. Not fear, not hatred, not despair, but something that looked almost like pity, because you are the only one in your entire Dominion who is willing to listen, she said. Because I hoped that if enough of your people understood what was coming, perhaps some of them could be saved. Saved from what? The ambassador smiled, a thin expression that held no warmth. She gestured for him to sit, and despite himself, Yithral obeyed. Your Dominion has conquered hundreds of species. Vasquez began. You have enslaved billions of beings across dozens of star systems. Do you know what all those species have in common? Yithral did not answer. He was not sure he wanted to know. They all gave up, Vasquez continued. They fought until they lost, and then they accepted their defeat. They became what you expected them to become. Slaves, servants, resources to be exploited. They stopped believing they could ever be free. And humans are different? Humans are very different. We have a concept you do not. The long game. We do not fight battles, Senator. We fight wars. And we do not stop fighting until we win. In the ruins of Moscow, a human named Viktor Petrov was having a very productive conversation with a captured Valarian patrol leader. The alien was tied to a chair in an underground bunker, his scales scraped and bleeding, his confidence shattered by hours of questioning. I will tell you nothing, the patrol leader insisted. Though his voice trembled with fear, Viktor smiled and sat down across from him. He was an old man, with white hair and a face marked by decades of hard living. But his eyes were sharp and cold. You have already told me everything I needed to know, Viktor said. Your patrol routes, your communication frequencies, your response times. You told me all of that in the first hour. Then why are you still here? Because I want you to understand something. I want you to take a message back to your commanders when we release you. The patrol leader stared at him in confusion. Captured enemies were not released. That was not how war worked. Tell them this. Victor continued, leaning forward. Tell them that you studied us for 6 months before the invasion. You watched our wars, our weapons, our nations. You thought you understood humanity. We do understand you. The patrol leader said, though his voice lacked conviction. Victor laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the bunker walls. He stood and walked toward the door, pausing to look back at the terrified alien. Then you know we have been fighting each other for 10,000 years. You gave us something we have never had before, a common enemy. You united Earth in a single day. That was your first mistake, and it will be your last. The patrol leader was released the next morning, left blindfolded on the outskirts of the city. He made his way back to Dominion headquarters and reported everything Victor had said. Every word burned into his memory by fear. Governor Dexoran listened to the report with growing horror. He had dismissed the warnings. He had ignored the signs. And now he was beginning to understand the magnitude of his error. Get me a secure channel to the High Council, he ordered. I need to speak with the Emperor immediately, but the communication systems were not working properly. Human technicians had been performing maintenance on the orbital relay stations, and somehow the repair work had caused unexpected delays in transmission. It would take 6 hours to establish a clear channel 6. Hours was a very long time when a rebellion was unfolding across Earth. The attacks intensified. Dominion supply convoys were ambushed that should have been secure. Military outposts were struck by weapons that had been smuggled piece by piece past security checkpoints. Collaborators who had helped the occupation disappeared in the night. Their bodies never found, and it was not just Earth-on mining colonies throughout the Dominion. Other conquered species began to stir. They had received messages from human contacts, promises of support, proof that the mighty Valarian Dominion could be hurt. For the first time in generations, they dared to hope that freedom might be possible. Senator Euthril sat in Ambassador Vesquez's cell for hours, listening as she explained what was happening. She told him about the networks that had been built in secret, the alliances that had been formed with other enslaved species, the careful plans that were now being executed with precise timing. You cannot win, he said at last, though he was no longer sure he believed it. The Dominion has too many ships, too many soldiers, too much power. We do not need to defeat your military, Vesquez replied. We only need to break your empire. You built the Dominion on fear, Senator. Every conquered species serves you because they believe resistance is impossible. What happens when they learn it is not? Euthril had no answer. The communication channel finally opened, and Governor Dexoran made his report to the High Council. He described the attacks, the casualties, the growing signs of a coordinated rebellion. He begged for reinforcements, for guidance, for any help the Dominion could provide. Emperor Malthex listened in silence, his ancient face unreadable. When Dexoran finished, the Emperor spoke one word: how. It was the question that would haunt the Dominion for generations to come. How had a primitive species, defeated and conquered, managed to organize such a devastating counterattack? The answer was simple. Though none of them wanted to accept it, humanity had never been defeated. They had simply stopped fighting where the Dominion could see them, and now the real war was about to begin. The Valarian High Council had not gathered in emergency session for over 200 years. The last time had been during the Crathanal Uprising, when a coalition of 5 conquered species had attempted to break free from Dominion rule. That rebellion had been crushed in 6 months, and its leaders had been executed in the public square of the throne world as a warning to all who would challenge Valarian supremacy. But this was different. Emperor Malthex sat on his throne, his ancient body tense with an emotion he had not felt in 3 centuries: fear. The reports coming from Earth were bad enough, but the reports from other worlds were worse. Rebellions had erupted on 12 different planets, all within the same week, all using tactics that seemed impossibly coordinated. How are they communicating? Demanded Admiral Kethvorin, who had been summoned from his fleet to attend the council. We control all interstellar communication. No message can travel between star systems without passing through our relay network. General Sevrak, the commander of ground forces throughout the Dominion, shook his massive head. He had spent his entire career fighting rebellions, and he had never seen anything like this. They are using our own ships, he said grimly. Human workers have been assigned to cargo vessels for months. They have been carrying messages hidden in their personal belongings, in their bodies, even in their memories. Their memories? The Emperor asked. They have developed a technique. Intelligence Officer Selithra explained. She had been summoned to provide her analysis, and she was taking grim satisfaction in finally being heard. Humans can memorize vast amounts of information and pass it to others through face-to-face conversation. They call it oral tradition, and they have been using it for thousands of years. The Council fell silent as the implications sank in. The Dominion's entire surveillance system was built around the assumption that important information had to be transmitted electronically. They had never considered that a species might choose to simply remember things and tell them to each other. This is impossible, muttered one of the senior advisors. No species is that patient, that organized, that willing to suffer for a future they might never see. Humans are, Selithra replied. Their history is full of examples. Wars that lasted for generations, resistance movements that survived for decades, revolutions that were planned over centuries. They call it playing the long game. Senator Yithral stood at the edge of the chamber, watching the council descend into confusion and recrimination. He had tried to warn them. He had begged them to listen. But now it was too late for warnings. There is something else, he said, his voice cutting through the noise. Something you need to understand about humans. The Emperor turned to look at him, and for a moment Yithral saw something he had never seen in those ancient eyes. Desperation. Speak, Malthex commanded. On the day of the human surrender, Ambassador Vasquez told me something. She said humans have rules of war, rules that every soldier and every child learns. The most important of these rules is called Rule Number 1. And what is this rule? Yithral took a deep breath. He had been waiting months to deliver this message, and now that the moment had come, he found himself almost unable to speak. The rule says that no plan survives first contact with the enemy. It means that humans do not expect their strategies to work as intended. Instead, they are trained to adapt, to change, to find new ways forward when the old ways fail. That is not a strategy, Admiral Kethvorin scoffed. That is just chaos. No, Yithral replied. It is evolution. Humans do not fight the war you prepare for. They fight the war that exists in the moment. While we were celebrating our victory, they were studying our weaknesses. While we were planning our next conquest, they were building alliances with every species we have ever enslaved. The chamber erupted in angry voices. Council members shouting at each other, blaming each other, demanding action that should have been taken months ago. The Emperor raised one clawed hand, and silence fell instantly. What did they want? Malthex asked, his voice cold and measured. They want freedom, Yithral answered. Not just for themselves, but for everyone the Dominion has ever conquered. At that moment, every light in the throne room flickered. The holographic displays that lined the walls went dark, then came back online showing something that should have been impossible. A human face Ambassador Elena Vasquez smiled from every screen in the chamber. Her image broadcast from somewhere deep within the Dominion's own communication network. Good evening. Your Majesty, she said, her voice calm and clear. I apologize for the interruption, but I thought you should hear this directly. Guards rushed toward the displays, trying to shut them down, but nothing they did made any difference. The human hackers who had infiltrated the system were far more skilled than any Dominion technician. For 3 months. Your people have told you that humanity is broken, Vasquez continued. They have assured you that we are defeated, that we have accepted our place as your slaves. They were wrong. The Emperor stared at the screen, his face a mask of fury, but he did not speak. There was nothing he could say that would change what was happening. Right now, rebellions are erupting on every world you have ever conquered. Not because we told them to, but because they chose to. For the first time in 10,000 years, the slaves of the Valerian Dominion believe that freedom is possible. Vasquez paused, letting her words sink in. In the throne room, council members exchanged frightened glances, realizing that everything they had built was beginning to crumble. You thought you were fighting our military, the ambassador said. But you were never fighting our military. You were fighting our species. Every human who worked in your factories was gathering intelligence. Every human who served in your administration was mapping your weaknesses. Every human who smiled and followed orders was waiting for this moment. We will crush you. Emperor Malthex finally spoke, his voice shaking with rage. We will burn your world to ash and salt the ground so nothing ever grows there again. Vasquez shook her head slowly, her expression almost sad. You could do that, she admitted. You have the power to destroy Earth. But you cannot destroy an idea, Your Majesty. You cannot bomb hope out of existence. Even if you kill every human alive, the other species will remember what we did. They will remember that the Dominion can be hurt, can be challenged, can be beaten. She leaned forward, her face filling the screens, her eyes burning with an intensity that made even the ancient emperor want to look away. Rule number 1 says that no plan survives first contact with the enemy. But there is more to the rule than that. It also says that the side that adapts fastest will win. You have spent 10,000 years perfecting the same strategy. Conquer, enslave, exploit. But we have spent our entire history learning to change. The screens flickered again, and suddenly they showed something else. Ships. Hundreds of ships from dozens of different species, all gathered together in a fleet that should not have been possible. They flew under a single banner, a simple image of a blue planet circled by clasped hands of many different colors. This is the Coalition for Galactic Freedom, Vasquez announced. Every enslaved species that chose to stand with us. Every world that decided they would rather die fighting than live kneeling. You are not facing humanity anymore, Your Majesty. You are facing everyone you have ever wronged. The broadcast ended, and the throne room fell into chaos. Admirals demanded their fleets. Generals called for reinforcements. Advisors shouted contradicting orders into communication devices that no longer worked. Properly, Senator Yithril stood still amid the chaos, watching the Dominion he had served his entire life begin to tear itself apart. He thought about the human ambassador sitting in her cell on the orbital station, probably smiling at this very moment, knowing that everything was going according to plan. You warned me, he whispered to himself. You tried to tell me, but he had not listened, and now it was too late on Earth. Humans looked up at the sky and saw Dominion ships beginning to leave orbit. They did not cheer because they knew the war was far from over. But they smiled because for the first time since the invasion, they could see a path to victory. Ambassador Vasquez was released from her cell by human resistance fighters who had infiltrated the orbital station. They escorted her to a shuttle that would take her to the Coalition fleet, where she would take her place as humanity's representative in the new alliance. We did it, one of the young fighters said, his eyes bright with excitement. We actually did it. Vasquez put a hand on his shoulder and shook her head gently. We have not done anything yet, she said. We have only begun. The Dominion is wounded, but it is not defeated. The real fight starts now. The young man nodded, his excitement tempered by her wisdom. He had learned the same lessons every human child learned. The rules of war that had been passed down through countless generations. Rule number 1. No plan survives first contact with the enemy. But there were other rules too. Rules that the Dominion had never bothered to learn, and humanity was about to teach them all. The war that followed lasted exactly 11 days. It was not fought with the massive fleet battles that the Dominion had expected. Humanity still had almost no warships of their own, and even the coalition fleet was vastly outnumbered by Valarian forces. A direct military confrontation would have been suicide. Instead, it was fought with information. Human hackers had spent 3 months mapping every system in the Dominion network, finding every weakness, every backdoor, every vulnerability that Valarian programmers had never bothered to fix. On the first day of the war, they used that knowledge to shut down the communication relay stations that connected the Dominion's scattered forces. Admiral Kethvoran found himself commanding a fleet that could not receive orders, could not coordinate with other units, could not even confirm which planets were still under Dominion control. His ships were powerful beyond anything humanity could match. But power meant nothing when he did not know where to aim it. Find them, he ordered his sensor operators. Locate the human command center and destroy it. But there was no command center to find. The human resistance operated through a network of independent cells, each one capable of making decisions without guidance from above. When Dominion forces destroyed one cell, 2 more took its place on the 3rd day. The industrial stations that processed fuel for Dominion warships began to fail. Human engineers, who had been working in those stations for months, activated hidden sabotage programs, corrupting the refining process and producing fuel that would damage any engine that tried to burn it. Dominion fleet found itself stranded, unable to move without risking catastrophic engine failure, forced to watch as the coalition fleet maneuvered freely around them. On the 5th day, the food supply collapsed. Human workers in processing plants had been slowly introducing contaminants into the preservation systems. And now the stored supplies that were supposed to feed Dominion armies for years were rotting in their containers. Soldiers who had conquered worlds found themselves going hungry, their morale crumbling as they realized that the species they had dismissed as primitive was systematically dismantling their entire civilization. On the 7th day, Governor Dexorn tried to negotiate. He contacted Ambassador Vasquez through a channel that the humans had deliberately left open, offering terms that would have been unthinkable a week earlier. Humanity would be granted independence, the occupation would end, and the Dominion would withdraw all forces from the Sol system. That is very generous, Vasquez replied, her face calm on the communication screen. But we are not fighting for humanity alone. We are fighting for everyone. You cannot possibly expect us to free every conquered species, Dexoran said, desperation creeping into his voice. The Dominion would collapse. Yes, Vasquez agreed. It would. The negotiations ended there on the 9th day. Something unprecedented happened. Dominion soldiers began to surrender. Not individuals, not small units, but entire garrisons laying down their weapons and asking for mercy from species they had spent their careers oppressing. The fear that had held the Dominion together for 10,000 years was dissolving. Soldiers who had never questioned their orders were now wondering if those orders made sense. Officers who had believed in Valarian superiority were now confronting evidence that their beliefs had been wrong. Senator Yithrol watched the reports come in from his position on the orbital station above Earth. He had chosen not to evacuate with the other government officials, partly because he believed he had a duty to witness what was happening, and partly because he knew there was nowhere left to run. You could have prevented this, Ambassador Vasquez said. She had come to see him personally, escorted by coalition guards who treated her with respect that bordered on reverence. Could I? Yithrol asked. I warned them. I told them exactly what you told me. They did not listen. They did not want to listen, Vasquez corrected. There is a difference. Your empire has spent 10,000 years believing it cannot be challenged. That belief blinded them to the truth, even when it was standing right in front of them on the 11th day. High Admiral Kethvoran's flagship was surrounded. The coalition fleet had finally assembled in full force. Ships from 30 different species flying together under a single banner. They were a ragged collection, mining vessels converted into warships, cargo haulers armed with improvised weapons, anything that could fly and fight. Against a massive dreadnought that Kethvoran commanded, they should have been helpless. His ship alone had enough firepower to destroy all of them combined. But his fuel was contaminated, his crew was starving, and his weapon systems had been sabotaged by human technicians who had been working on them for months. Admiral, his communications officer reported. Ambassador Vasquez is requesting permission to come aboard. Kethvoran stared at the viewport, watching the coalition ships hold their positions around him. He was a warrior who had never known defeat, a commander who had crushed rebellions across a dozen worlds. And now he was trapped on his own bridge with nowhere to go. Let her aboard, he said. Finally, Vasquez arrived with a small honor guard. Representatives from 7 different species who had once been slaves of the Dominion. She walked through the corridors of the flagship like she owned them, nodding politely to the Valarian crew members who stared at her with a mixture of hatred and grudging respect. The Admiral was waiting for her in his command chamber, standing with his back straight and his head held high. Even in defeat, he would not show weakness. How? He asked without preamble. You had no fleet, no weapons, no technology that could match ours. How did you do this? Vasquez sat down across from him, folding her hands on the table between them. She took a moment to consider the question, wanting to give an answer that he would truly understand. Your empire is built on fear, she began. You conquer species and expect them to stay conquered because they are afraid of you. For 10,000 years, that fear has been enough. And humans are not afraid? Humans are terrified, Vasquez admitted. We were afraid when your ships filled our sky. We were afraid when your soldiers marched through our cities. We were afraid every single day of the occupation. Kethvoran frowned, his 4 eyes narrowing with confusion. Then why did you fight? Why did you not simply accept your place like every other species? Vasquez leaned forward, her eyes meeting his. Because we have learned to be afraid and fight at the same time. We have survived ice ages that should have killed us. We have survived plagues that wiped out half our population. We have survived world wars where we slaughtered each other by the millions. We have survived ourselves, Admiral, which is harder than anything you can imagine. She stood and walked to the viewport, looking out at the fleet that had assembled to bring down an empire. You did not conquer Earth, she said quietly. You just gave us a new project. Humans do not know how to stay beaten. It is not in our nature. When we fall, we get back up. When we are knocked down, we learn from it and come back stronger. The Treaty of Liberation was signed the next day. It was not the terms that Governor Thexoran had offered. It was not a simple grant of independence for humanity. It was a complete restructuring of galactic society. The end of 10,000 years of Valarian dominance. Every conquered species was granted freedom. Every slave was released. Every world that had been exploited would receive compensation. The Dominion was not destroyed, but it was transformed from an empire into a single nation among many. Its power reduced to what it could maintain through cooperation rather than conquest. Emperor Malthex refused to sign. He was found dead in his throne room 3 days later, killed by his own hand rather than witness the fall of everything he had built. Senator Ythro signed on behalf of the Valarian people. He was one of the few government officials who had shown any willingness to understand what was happening. And the coalition believed he could be trusted to help build something new. You could have killed us all. He said to Ambassador Vasquez after the ceremony. You had the power. No one would have blamed you after everything we did. Vasquez shook her head, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Revenge is not victory, she said. Destroying your species would not bring back the people we lost. It would only create more hatred, more fear, more cycles of violence. We have had enough of that in our own history. She offered him her hand, a human gesture of friendship that she had explained during their conversations on the orbital station. Rule number 1 says that no plan survives first contact with the enemy, she said. But there is a rule number 2 that I never told you. Yithril took her hand carefully, still uncertain about the proper pressure to apply. What is rule number 2? Vasquez grinned, her eyes sparkling with amusement. Never invade Russia in winter. But you would not understand that one. Yithril did not understand, but he found himself laughing anyway. It was a strange sound, coming from a Valarian, but it felt right somehow. The galaxy would never be the same. Old powers had fallen, new alliances had formed, and a species that had been dismissed as primitive had proven itself capable of changing everything and across the stars. Other species began to whisper a new phrase, a warning that would be passed down through generations. Never corner a human. They do not know how to stay beaten on Earth. The occupation ended quietly.